I am Michael New. I am the astrobiology discipline scientist. That means I'm in charge of the exobiology program, and I work also in managing now the new Emerging Worlds program and the Habitable Worlds program. I have other jobs too. I'm the Discovery Program Lead Scientist, and I'm the Program Scientist for the Planetary Data System. I'm happy to answer questions about all those things, but predominantly I'm here today to talk to you about grant writing from my point of view as somebody who has to manage the evaluation of grants and the selection of grants. Okay? So the big question really is, where's the money and how do I get some from my lab, do my research? And that's what the focus is of this talk. So everybody's busy, and so I want to cut to the chase initially. In case you want, I'll turn off now. 4 key points. The best way to learn to write proposals is to actually go and write them. You should start early. That's best because if you're a senior grad student or even a postdoc, usually your advisor has funding for you. And so not getting funded in a grant is not a big deal. And so it's a good time to start writing proposals, seeing what works and what doesn't work. Keep in mind that people like myself, program officer, is the interface between NASA in this case, or NSF, or NIH, or DOE, and you. Don't be shy about calling us and asking us questions, or emailing us, actually, and asking us questions. That's our job. We are supposed to be the user-friendly interface into the big NASA science bureaucracy. If you don't get funded or selected, you should read the review comments and then call up the program officer and request a debrief where we can talk to you about what the review means, because sometimes these things are written in opaque language, and the program officer can help you translate. And finally, one of the absolute key, top, most important principles for writing proposals is don't piss off your reviewers. And there's a bunch of ways you can do that, and we will encounter them as we go. So that's pretty much, you can all tune off right now, because that's the key to what I'm going to talk about for the next hour or whatever. So I'm going to be focusing on NASA because that's what I know best. A lot of what I will say, though, is pretty generically useful. Always, though, read the call for proposals really carefully. All of it. Even the parts that look really, really boring. In fact, those are the parts you got to pay the most attention to. Because the really, really boring parts are usually parts written by people like me, telling people like you what the goals of the program are, what font size we want you to use, whether you can request computer funding, that kind of thing. So you really got to look at everything and follow those instructions for whatever you're applying to. If you don't understand an instruction, or if something you want to do is not really covered by any of the instructions in the call for proposals, call us up. Ask us a question. That's what we do. So what does NASA's pot of gold look like? So NASA is the premier funding agency for planetary science and astrobiology research. We have an RNA research and analysis budget of $160 to $200 million a year. We have 24 RNA programs, research and analysis programs. We've cut that down a little bit to like 22, I think. Each program has anywhere from $1 million to $10 or $15 million available each year. And that doesn't count our operating missions, which often have either participating scientist calls or guest investigator programs to bring the community into the mission. Pretty much all of the funding that we offer, except for whole mission funding, is offered through something called ROSES, Research Opportunities in Space and Earth Sciences. We release it once a year, and we amend it if we add new solicitations. Comes out generally as close to Valentine's Day, February 14th, as we can make it. Because we are not without senses of humor. And it's divided into 2 parts. The first part is called the summary of solicitation. That's the boring stuff I was talking about. It describes the overall opportunity, and it gives you proposal and submission information. And if you want to use NSPIRES, which is NASA's system, do this, do that, do the other thing. If you want to use grants.gov, which is a government-wide proposal submission system, it says go over here and do this, that, and the other thing. And then there are appendices. There's 5 of them right now, A, B, C, D, and E. The first 4 are 1 per each of the science divisions at NASA. So there's astrophysics appendix, planetary science, heliophysics, earth sciences, and then there's a 5th appendix for cross-divisional research. The new exoplanets research program, for example, is considered cross-division, cross-disciplinary, and so it actually lives in this 5th appendix. And inside each appendix are all the calls. So each program, at least in planetary sciences, each program is managed by a group of scientists at headquarters. We call them caucuses. We used to have a lot of overlap between our programs, but we recently did a very, very large reorganization of our RNA offerings. And we've tried to reduce that, not because we don't want to give you opportunities to apply, but because it made getting reviewers very, very difficult. If you're trying to find a reviewer who studies lunar impact melt glasses, and you need them for one panel, that's hard, but it's not impossible. If you need that person for 2 or 3 panels, then that gets much, much, much harder to recruit. We also wanted to reduce overlap in order to level the playing field so that most of the proposals dealing with, say, lunar impact melt glasses would be evaluated together by the same group of people, as opposed to being evaluated by one group of people if they were submitted to the old planetary geology and geophysics program, and a separate group of people if they were proposed to LASER, Lunar Applied Science and Engineering Research. RNA programs, that the calls come in different types and disciplines. We have data analysis programs. We've got fundamental research programs, participating scientist programs, technology programs, a bunch of others. And we also divide them up by disciplines as well. Mars, outer planets, atmospheres, that kind of stuff. So data analysis programs are focused on using mission data that's already been returned and archived in the planetary data system. So we have LDAP, the Lunar Data Analysis Program, MDAP, the Mars Data Analysis Program, DDAP, the Discovery Data Analysis Program right now, and CDAP, the Cassini Data Analysis Program. And each of those 4 programs is focused around a particular set of missions and a particular set of the data from those missions. So if you wanted to analyze messenger data and only messenger data, and you didn't want to do any comparative anything, and you didn't want to look at modeling and comparing it to real data, then you'd go, in that case, to DDAP, because messenger was a discovery program. Now, these data analysis programs are sometimes attached to single missions, and sometimes they can be short-lived. They can live for 1 or 2 calls while a mission is returning its data. And then once that mission ends, it may live for another year or 2, and then we throw it back into the general pot of proposals. The big programs that exist for long periods of time are usually in fundamental research. This is basic research that expands our knowledge of fundamental processes. It benefits current missions, it enables future missions, and it can help us make progress on understanding things from our past missions, as long as it's not pure data analysis. We have instrument development programs. We have 2 of them. One's called Matisse and one's called Picasso. Picasso is for immature instruments, what we call low TRL, low technology readiness level mission instruments. These are instruments that are somewhere between a sketch on a cocktail napkin and something kind of sitting in pieces on your lab bench. Matisse is for maturation, where you go from something that's in pieces on your lab bench to something that's solid in one piece and subject to being tested in some conditions similar to flight. Participating scientist programs or guest investigator programs are ways in which we broaden the participation in a mission. We basically bring people from the community onto a mission team to do research using the mission data that's outside of what the mission proposed to do. These are very unique opportunities. They typically occur once in a mission. So shortly after MSL was ready to go, Mars Science Laboratory, we had one competition for participating scientists. I don't know if another one will ever happen. Dawn, which is our mission to two big asteroids, Vesta and Ceres, we've actually had two participating scientist competitions. The first one was, and that's because Vesta and Ceres are thought to be very, very different geologically. So we had one for Vesta, and we had a bunch of participating scientists come on. I think it was 15 or 18. They participated through the encounter with Vesta. They stayed on for a while. Their grants are now falling off. And we are just now releasing a call for guest investigators, slightly different from participating scientists, for the next encounter, which is with Ceres. So if you know about icy bodies, cryovolcanism, that kind of thing, you may want to take a look at that. Finally, we have all kinds of things that pop up. Mission concept studies we fund sometimes, fellowships, emerging topics, that kind of thing. So, yeah, so that's kind of the different kinds of RNA programs we have. Any questions? I mean, I'm not seeing any hands going up, but I'm also not being able to see, people's heads nodding or whatever. So I'll just be quiet for a minute. Okay, I got one person from chat saying it's good, so I'll move on. So when you're contemplating your proposal, there are also a couple of add-on programs. You don't apply to them directly, you apply to them through another program. There's two right now. There's the Planetary Major Equipment Program. So this funds the purchase of large, that is greater than $40,000 pieces of capital equipment. It has its own description of what you need to do in ROSES, but basically it requires a special add-on mini proposal. And what goes in that mini proposal depends on how much you're asking for, whether you're asking for $40K for a top-of-the-line mass spec GC that sits on your bench, or you're asking for $1 million for a microprobe. We also have the Early Career Fellowship. The Early Career Fellowship was created to aid in the transition from a postdoctoral position to a tenure track equivalent position. We've tried to keep the application requirements very minimal. There's a checkbox you have to check on the cover page, and I think we give you one extra page in your CV. You can be the PI or the science PI / co-I on the proposal. We can talk about what that is. And it's two parts. First, you get the grant, and you get a certain amount of notoriety. And then if you get a job offer for a tenure track equivalent position, you're eligible for up to $100,000 of matching startup funding, which can make you attractive to universities. Now, there used to be education and outreach supplemental awards that you could apply for to do a little curriculum development or something. At the moment, those are on hold. You may have heard that there was a big reorganization of the way the federal government funds education public outreach activities and sciences under the FY14 president's budget. The Congress didn't like that. Things are still very much in flux. And so until we actually know what we're supposed to be doing, most of our education public outreach funding is kind of on hold. So how do you get the money? Simple. Okay. You start off by defining your research topic. Then you go read Roses and find the program that your research topic fits in. And if you have trouble, you trying to decide between two programs, contact program official. Every call for proposals in Roses has at least one name associated with it in the last page of the call that says, for more information, contact Dr. Michael New or Dr. Jeff Grossman or Dr. Kelly Fatt or whatever. Based on what the program is asking for, refine that research topic. Sit around and think through your proposal and then write something. And then get somebody outside of your immediate circle to read it and critique it. Take that critique very seriously, because I can't guarantee that the 4 people in the world who study exactly what you study will be on the panel, but they'll be knowledgeable. They just may not be your equal in that particular area. Finally, once you've massaged the proposal to a place where you can't stand looking at it anymore, submit it. We'll do the peer review. You'll get the reviews back, and hopefully you'll also get a selection letter. So I'd like to now start talking a little bit about the practical parts of writing a proposal for Roses. Any questions about the sort of prefatory material? I got one note. Okay, Brandy asked a good question. How long does it take to hear back? I presume you mean after you've submitted the proposal, how long will it be before you hear whether you've been selected or not? So you have to give us at least 3 to 4 months to find a panel, get the reviews done, make selection recommendations, and go from there. Generally speaking, the panel meets 3 to 4 months after the proposals come in. And within a couple of weeks after that, we can tell you whether you're in one of 2 categories, selectable or not. What does it mean? Not selectable means that you're basically not going to get funded. I can't fund you because your scores were too low, or your argument for the relevance of your proposal to my program was not good or absent, or there was some major problem with the way your budget was presented. If you're selectable, that's sort of like being in limbo. It means that you scored well enough so that there's no impediment to my selecting you or recommending you to be selected. But I haven't made that selection. I haven't made that recommendation yet. Generally, I will email people in my program within a few weeks after the review panel meets, say whether they're selectable or not. And hopefully then it's only a couple of weeks more before I actually announce selection. That answer, basically. Debriefings, are debriefings typical if you're not selected? They should be. Not everybody feels comfortable picking up the phone or emailing me and asking me why they didn't get selected. Sometimes it's obvious. You look at the proposal, you look at the review, and the review will say, "Oh, look, you didn't include a relevance section," or something like that. But if it's not so clear cut, if it's more an issue of technical weaknesses, you should definitely ask for a debriefing. And we can talk through what the review says and what I remember from the conversation and what I know from my experience that can help you. But a lot of people are very uncomfortable interacting with a program officer at that level, although I frankly don't know why. I'm going to move on now. So NASA is looking for two things when we look at our proposal. We want to fund research at the highest scientific quality we can. And for that, NASA relies on peer review. We want to make sure also that the research we're funding furthers NASA's goals. And we want to be able to verify that taxpayer dollars, remember, this is not my money or even your money, it's everybody's money, will be used properly. And for that, NASA relies on me. So when you're writing your proposal, keep in mind that there are two audiences. There's peer review panel and me. So when you're writing your proposal, keep in mind that your job is to make it as easy as possible for both audiences to understand your proposal, value your proposal, and select your proposal. So what you should expect. This is one of those, listicles, basically. You don't expect to write a great piece of literature. Proposals aren't. They shouldn't be. What you are going to do is you should expect to write a focused, fairly no-frills document. Remember, you only have 15 pages. There's a lot of material you have to cram in there. You're not going to definitively answer a grand question that's been plaguing your community or sub-community for a decade or more. That takes time. What you should be focusing on is answering a focused, well-posed question of limited scope that can actually be accomplished in the 3-year time span of a grant and given the amount of resources you're requesting. Unfortunately, your audience is not going to review your proposal in some quiet, uninterrupted setting. They're not going to be in a book-lined library with a fire going and a dog at their feet. They're going to review your proposal in the chaos of their daily lives, which means that you have to make it easy for them to see your point and to see what you're going to do and how you're going to do it and all that. Now, like I said before, you cannot guarantee that you would like to think that your audience would be world experts on your subtopic. That's not possible. There's only 5 of them, maybe. But your audience will be knowledgeable about your field, and they will be colleagues from similar or allied fields. I'm not going to give an isotope geochemistry proposal to a molecular biologist, but I may give an isotope geochemistry proposal on metal isotopes to a reviewer who mostly focuses on carbon, nitrogen, sulfur. Finally, don't expect your audience to accept your approach without question. We're all scientists. We are all trained to be skeptical. And that's what you're going to get. And that's what I want. I want a panel that's going to look at proposals skeptically and critically. So the review panel primarily is interested in the scientific merit of the proposal. We ask them to also consider the relevance of the proposal to the program and cost reasonableness and realism. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the meat of their effort is usually devoted to the scientific merit. So you have to be thinking about maybe 5 things that a panel is going to care about. The first is, why should they care about your review for your proposal at all? So you need to pick a compelling and appropriate topic that's the proper scope for a 3-year single investigator initiated proposal. And they're going to ask, what's the point of this research? So you should need to describe the objectives and what you expect to get out, what the end result of your work would be if it's successful. They're going to want to know in very much detail what you're doing, your methodology, your assumptions, a detailed work plan saying who does what and when. Included in all that should be some acknowledgement of potential pitfalls and backups and workarounds. They're going to be asked, the panel is going to be thinking about what are weaknesses and strengths. And if you can anticipate the questions about your merit or your relevance or your cost and answer them ahead of time, that's great. And panels are very sensitive to how everything fits together. You have to logically link the objectives to the methodology and the anticipated result, as well as all this NASA's objective. You're telling a story. There's another way to think about it. You're telling a story, and you have to have compelling characters, an exciting plot, and it all has to get tied up in 15 pages. So what I'm looking for when I look at a proposal is different. First thing I want to ask is, does this proposal is it appropriate for my program? I do exobiology, so if somebody submits a proposal to look at cryovolcanism on Titan, it's not very appropriate unless they've made some great argument in the relevance section explaining why understanding the incidence of cryovolcanism on Titan is important for understanding the potential for life on Titan. Now, I'm also interested obviously in high quality science. And again, for that, I do lean very heavily on the peer review. I'm the custodian of taxpayer dollars. And so I have to ask, when I look at a proposal that's meritorious, can I afford it? So don't supersize your proposal. And if you can, try to organize your proposal into discrete tasks or modules. Because if to do your entire proposal costs $500,000 a year, and I don't have that, I can't afford that. If you've got a monolithic proposal with no subtasks, there's not much I can do. I got to either take it or leave it. If you've got 3 subtasks, though, now I can call you up and I can negotiate and say, well, I can't afford a $500,000 a year award. I can afford a $300K a year award. So how about doing tasks 1 and 3? I'm going to be interested in whether the proposal furthers NASA's objectives and the objectives of the exobiology or astrobiology program. So in your relevance section, spend a couple paragraphs and make an argument for linking your proposal objectives to something that NASA documents say NASA officially cares about. And you have to make the argument. You can't just copy a paragraph out of a decadal survey or a MEPAG document or the astrobiology roadmap, bold in a few words, and leave it at that. That's the starting point for a relevance argument. It's not the ending point. I'm responsible for spending money, as I keep saying, and so I need to know where it's going. And so that's why you need to provide a detailed budget and lots of justification. We don't have a page limit on the budget justification section, and that's why. We want you to give us as much information as you have to make us understand why you're sending $50,000 to Sally at Westex Incorporated. And what that $50,000, how that breaks out. How much of it's salary, how much of it's material, how much of it is overhead, things like that. Finally, I'm unfortunately stuck dealing with the hobgoblin of little minds, which are details, and that means I have to make sure that the proposal contains all the required information. And for that, you have to follow the guidebook for proposals, which lays out exactly what needs to be in every proposal. So the guidebook is available at the NSPIRES website, and the link is there. If you're not already registered as a user of NSPIRES, I urge you to go do that tonight. When you register, you'll be able to request that your email address be added to a couple of different mailing lists that ping you every time ROSES comes out, or we add or amend a solicitation in ROSES. The guidebook, which you get to from NSPIRES, tells you what needs to be in a proposal, how we evaluate things, our rules about conflicts of interest, all important stuff that you really need to know. every funding agency has a guide like this. The NIH, I think, even has online tutorials. Another resource is something called Service and Advice for Research and Analysis, SARA. There's the URL. It provides news, tips, step-by-step guides for some things, grant statistics on, selection rates, average award sizes, things like that. And as I said before, don't guess. If you don't understand something in a call for proposals, contact the program officer at the discipline time. Email them. That's our job. So before you start writing your proposal, sit down, think through, and plan the research. I mean, really think about it. If you're doing something new for you, or new in general, or you're doing something that's been done but in a new way, it's really a good idea to demonstrate that it works. This is especially true if you're going to use a technique for which you are not known to have been used. Wait, what did I say? A technique that's new to you, that the community does not know you know how to use. That's always helpful to see a paragraph in a proposal that says, we did this in my new lab, and here's the results, and it worked fine. You can also point to a research paper that's been published. You can say, as we demonstrated in, this journal, this method works. When you're writing your proposal, structuring it, keep it focused. Don't run after every single detail about whatever the problem is. Pick a couple of objectives, focus on them. Don't try to ignore or hide weaknesses. If you know there's a problem, own up to it, but then tell us how you think you can either work around it, or you have a backup, or something. Because I guarantee you that panelists will find it if you don't. And it's always better to say, look, yeah, this method has not been shown to work in this system, but these are the reasons why we think it will, and if it doesn't, we can do this, or we can do that, or we can do the other thing. Don't rely on your past. Panels are instructed to review the proposal, period. We can talk later over a virtual beer about whether or not that always happens, but they're told not to consider that this proposal is from Bob. We know Bob, and Bob's been doing this work for 10 years. And yeah, even though he doesn't explain what he's doing in the proposal, give him the money, he'll do good work. When I hear something like that in a panel, I come down on the panel, it's like a ton of bricks. And so make sure you dot the I's and cross the T's. Finally, it's a fact of life that if you're proposing to do something that's not in the mainstream of your field, that's okay. But you may wind up having a slightly greater burden to show how feasible what you're proposing to do is. So when you're writing, try to write clearly and simply. Try to avoid hyperbole. If you remember, I said at the beginning, don't annoy your reviewers. And hyperbole is one of the things that will annoy them. Saying this will be the first, greatest, best, unless it really, really is, it's going to irritate people. A lot, actually. Organize the proposal well and do follow the guidebook. Don't make us look around trying to find where you've decided to put the significance and impact discussion. The guidebook says it should be paragraph, section 2 or whatever. That's where it should be. And as you're writing the proposal, try to provide readers with clear signposts to what's coming up. This could be bolded titles. This could be underlined things. The point is that You want to be able to let people know this is coming up, and if they need to find something, where to find it. Make sure you thoroughly and review and cite the relevant literature. It's a corollary to Murphy's Law that if you fail to cite someone, they will almost certainly be a reviewer of your proposal. And they will take it badly. I definitely think that people don't always use graphics and tables that effectively. So there are many things that are much more clearly conveyed in a table or as a graphic than in words. So it's much more compact to describe a workflow. Like, we're going to get the samples, and then we're going to split them, and then we're going to, Bob's going to get this, and Sally's going to get that, and so on. It's much easier to do that in a graphic than in a bunch of words sometimes. If you're proposing multiple tasks, as I recommended that you do, somewhere you should have a paragraph or two describing how you're going to integrate them all, how they interrelate. This one forms the basis for that one, or not. And finally, NASA doesn't care if you're proposing the same research to 2 or more programs or 2 or more agencies. You just have to tell us, okay? There's a current and pending support section that you have to fill in, and sometimes even you may need to put a paragraph into the actual proposal that says, this research is related to research that's currently under evaluation by the National Science Foundation, and here's how they're different, or here's how they're complementary, or here's how they relate. NASA doesn't care. We just need to know so that we can cut deals with other federal agencies so that you're not getting funded twice to do the same work. By the way, getting funded twice to do the same work is actually a violation of federal law. Couple of don't forget. Provide detailed budgets for all of your co-investigators and subcontractors, including a summary and a justification. Don't just have a line item in your budget, $50,000 to Sally at West Tech Incorporated. You need to actually tell us a separate budget. Here's the budget for the $50,000 for Sally at West Tech. It's for this much for salary, this much for materials, supplies, this much for paper, whatever. Don't try to sneak things in the budget. We find them. We don't like that. Good way to annoy both your reviewers and your program officer. So you're going to need to justify stuff. You're going to need to justify your travel, for example. Don't just think, oh, I'll just put in 4 conferences a year. We're going to ask, why are they needed? We're going to ask, who's going? Don't ask for page charges for publications in the first year of an award if somewhere in the work plan you haven't said that you're going to publish a paper in year 1. And again, if the proposed research is related to research funded by or proposed to some other agency, be really clear on what part of the research will be funded by each agency. Again, NASA doesn't care. That's okay with NASA. We're happy to play with others. But we need to know that we're playing with others. So if you're not selected, and remember, selection rates are not better than 30%. So 70% of applicants get nothing more than a thank you letter and a review. When you're not selected, first thing is take a breath, okay? It's not the end of the world. The second thing is if you're really, really angry and you feel you got to send an email to me questioning my intelligence and my integrity and my parentage and the ability of the review panel, write it up and email it to yourself. Don't send it to me. That is a great way to really irritate me. Remember that RNA programs are very competitive, and you may very well have to submit the same proposal multiple times before it gets selected. That's why we send you back reviews, to help you write better proposals. If you have any questions, email me, call me up, we'll have a debriefing. Probably not the same day, probably it'll be, all right, how about this day, how about this time? But we'll do it, absolutely. If you think a major mistake was made, I mean, really a big problem, you can formally and informally contest the review. There are, it is an informal process and a formal process. The informal process is, in the course of this debriefing, I say, yeah, sounds like we kind of screwed up. And I'll ask you to email me a detailed point-by-point rebuttal of things in the review that you think are just plain wrong. I'll take that and I will do two things with it. First, I'm going to send it back to the original reviewers and say, guys, what do you think? The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put together, get a bunch of 3, 2, 4 or something, a number of other people who are capable and qualified, but were not on my panel. And I'm going to ask them to do two things. First, look at the original review, and based on the rebuttal and the proposal, tell me if they think that the review is off. And then I'm going to ask them to review your proposal. About 1 in 4 requests for reconsideration, which is what this is called, get selected. Peer review is a human process. It is therefore very fallible. If you're not happy with that, if I come back and say, no, I've asked the reviewers, I've asked new reviewers, and they all say that this proposal really has this problem, and you're not satisfied, then there's an entire formal process that starts with you contacting Jonathan Rahl, who is the lead for the RNA program for Project Science. And I think that policy that outlines that process can be found at the SARA website, the SARA website. Always use the comments of the review panel to improve your proposal before you propose again. We spend time doing it. We want you to write better proposals. Try to provide feedback that is useful and actionable. And the second best way to learn how to write proposals is to actually review them. So when you're asked to serve on a panel, say yes, or even volunteer. We have volunteer forms all the time online where you can volunteer to be a reviewer. So take advantage of that because that's good training. So when you are selected, well, when you're asked, serve on a review panel. Keep in touch with me, especially until you get your funding. You may feel like you're bothering me, and I may feel like you're bothering me, but it's your job to bother me about where's my funding. And that's okay. For NASA, you have to submit a progress report, I think it's 60 days before your anniversary date in order to get the next year's money. So be on time with your progress report. They don't have to be long. They're like 3 pages, 5 pages. But we need them to actually say, yeah, this person's been doing the work they proposed to do. They're making good progress. If you've got some critical deadline, like I need to buy this instrument in year 2 and it goes on sale here and I need to buy it by there, work with me. Let me know. I'm not going to figure it out by myself. And finally, if I'm at a conference that you're at, when you see me, invite me to your talk, invite me to your poster, corner me at coffee. Don't follow me into the restroom. I hate it when that happens. People have done that, and that's really uncool. But, my job is to interface with you guys, find out what you're doing, see how I can help you. So don't be shy, okay? So Brandy asked how long it takes from when you submit your proposal to when you get notified. There's another time scale here, though, and that's from when you're notified to when you actually get your money. Unfortunately, it's not a simple process. So this is basically the timeline we've been talking about. If I move my mouse, people can't see my mouse, can they? All right. Okay. There you go. You can see that, right? So, we release the call for proposals in February. Notices of intent, which can be step 1 proposals, are due no earlier than a month later, usually several months later. 60 days from when you do this, you get the proposals, and then 2 to 4 months later, we do the reviews, and we send you an email here saying, hey, you're selectable. Hey! there's a lot of other stuff that has to go on for you to get your money. That's all that. Starts down here. About the same time as we release roses, the president goes to Congress and presents his budget request. Congress debates this, possibly for a long, long, long time. Usually, we cross a fiscal year boundary, and all the money I have, if I have any money unspent, kind of goes poof, and I have to wait for more money. Usually, that means Congress has to pass a continuing resolution, which extends funding for some length of time. Could be a day, a week, a month, 6 months, an entire year. While that continuing resolution is ongoing, I'm only getting a prorated portion of my funding. So if it's a 1-month continuing resolution, I'm getting 1/12 of my budget, which means I'm probably not making selections. I'm probably using that money to fund 1 month of existing awards. So Congress is going to debate some more, and this could go on for a while. It's actually at some point gone on for the entire fiscal year. Eventually, we either get an appropriation or a year-long continuing resolution. We're not done. Money hasn't gotten to me yet, so money can't get to you yet. The money, NASA has to submit what's called an op plan, an operations plan, that tells Congress, all right, you gave us $1.4 billion with a B dollars for planetary science. Here's how we're going to spend it. $165 million for research, $200 million for the Mars program, $300 million for the Discovery program, and so on. Congress doesn't have to agree to our op plan. And so this could go through a loop or two. Once Congress actually agrees to our op plan, then my bosses take whatever that amount of money, that $165 million, they have to then figure out how much of that's exobiology versus chemistry versus whatever. That takes some time. And it's only when this entire process from here all the way to here finally is completed, which could take up to 13 months, that I can actually proceed to make selection decisions or recommendations. Then award paperwork has to be complete, which generally takes about 2 weeks. I have to go into a system called Raptor and so-called release the funds. That isn't very hard. If the money is going to a NASA center or another federal agency, that's pretty quick. If it's a grant, though, to a nonprofit or a university, then something called HGAO, the Headquarters Grants Administration Office, has to start the award. This process can take 1 to 6 weeks. Lately, it's been much more than 6 weeks. When they're done with it, they have to send that initial paperwork to something called the NASA Shared Services Center, which completes the award, and they have a month to do that. And it's only after all this stuff and all these people touch it that the money finally arrives at your institution. Important to note that if you look, none of these people in this part of the chain work for me or my boss, or some of them even my boss's boss. So I have almost no leverage. And this happens. Sometimes the process bogs down. So I'll pause again for a second or two to see if anybody has any questions about money and things like that, proposal structure, whatever.
I was just wondering if you would like us to wait until we are postdocs or associate professors before we serve on a review panel.
Very good question. So I generally don't like to put grad students on panels. I don't even love to put postdocs on panels. And it's not because of their ability or lack thereof. What it comes down to is I'm deathly afraid of ruining somebody's career. What I'm really afraid of is that a grad student or a postdoc will be on a review panel, will be critical of a proposal from some big dude. One of the big dude's buddies will be on the panel, tell the big dude, oh, this grad student or postdoc really was, didn't like your work and was really instrumental in your not getting funded. And then that big dude going on jihad against the career of that person, that young person. So I'm very reluctant to do that. I do, however, have executive secretaries for every one of my panels. These are senior grad students or postdocs, and they are of the panel, but not they're in the panel, but not of the panel. So they don't review proposals, they don't write reviews, but they watch everything that's going on, they take notes, they manage the trafficking of various forms of the review form, which we'll talk about in a minute. And they get to see what's going on in what I hope is a fairly insulated position. I have started taking more postdocs on panels simply because I'm running out of reviewers. There's only so many people. But so that's my biggest worry. The one panel that we do that are almost all early career people is the NASA Earth and Space Science Fellowship, which is a postdoctoral program, postdoctoral funding program. And NASA Earth and Space Science Fellowship is a graduate funding. And so those panels are almost all postdocs or a few senior graduates.
Okay, great, thanks.
So peer review. Why peer review? Well, it's the least bad system we have for choosing exciting, relevant, high-quality research. It combines expert advice on particular topics, that's the panel, with general programmatic direction, which is me, or my colleague. NASA and the federal government in general is committed to open and fair competition for research funding and even mission funding. And this seems like the best way to do it. Peer review is not without its detractors, and there's a certain amount of debate that goes on in the science policy world about other or better ways to do it. But for now, this is what we got. In a nutshell, what happens is you and many other PIs submit a proposal to NASA, say. I get the proposal, I look at the topics, I put together a review panel of peers who are knowledgeable in these topics. The panel reviews each proposal independently and provides findings to me on 3 areas. Scientific merit, which we've talked a little bit about, relevance, which we've talked less about, and reasonableness of cost, which we've talked least about. I take those 3 evaluations, mix it up with programmatic considerations and budgetary considerations, and produce a selection recommendation that Jonathan Rawl, the lead for the Research and Analysis Program in the Planetary Science Division, then says yay or nay. So when it comes to setting up a peer review panel, I usually pick chairs of subpanels, and the subpanel chairs then work with me to select and recruit panel members. The identities of the panelists are, for NASA, kept secret from the world. NSF does something a little differently. NSF charters each of its review panels as parts of a giant panel that is chartered under something called the Federal Advisory Committees Act. And then once a year, the NSF publishes an alphabetical listing of every single person who was on a review panel that year. Since NASA is at its heart an engineering organization, most of what we do is contract, not grant. So our conflict of interest rules are the very strict kind that you need to use for awarding a government contract, not something a little looser. So we take them very, very seriously. We take conflicts of interest very, very seriously. We also take what are called potential perceptions of bias very seriously. So if somebody is a longtime collaborator of a PI or COI on a proposal, we may not let them review the proposal. People at the same institution as a PI of a proposal, even if they're not in the same department, have a conflict of interest and can't review that proposal. Panels meet for anywhere from 3 to 5 days. Each proposal gets between 30 and 45 minutes of discussion in the panel after the panelists have read the proposal and written an individual review at home. We also get mail-in reviews from people who are not at the panel, but who are super experts in some area, little area of the proposal. We have very few programs these days that are small enough to have a single panel evaluate all the proposals. Almost all the programs now are so big, we have multiple sub-panels that evaluate a subset of the proposal. We may use big plenary gatherings where all the panelists get together and look at reviews to sort of ensure consistency. Otherwise, the program officers who have to sign off on every single review, their job is to ensure consistency between the different subpanels. We tend to use what's called dog show rules. Normally, I would ask to see a show of hands how many of you have ever seen a confirmation dog show like Westminster Kennel Club or Crufts, but this format doesn't particularly allow me to see raised hands. But basically, in a dog show, they pick dogs that meet some breed standard. And the dog that is closest to its breed standard is considered the best dog. It's impossible to compare dogs of different breeds. How would you compare a Chihuahua to a Great Dane? I mean, they're almost different species as far as they look. So that is how we approach proposals. Reviewers do not compare proposals to each other, and every proposal is evaluated relative to some platonic ideal of itself. So Brandy asked a question that if you resubmit a past proposal, do the new reviewers take the past reviewers' comments into consideration? Do they compare the new proposal to the past one? Two answers. At NASA, all proposals are new. You can resubmit something, but the only people who know it's a resubmission are myself and any panelists who saw it on the previous year that have been asked back to the panel. But we don't tell our panelists this is a resubmission. I'm pretty certain NSF and NIH do. NSF actually requires a section in the proposal titled a response to previous reviews, which is where you encapsulate all the changes you've made. NIH in its review process has more states of being for proposals other than just selected and declined. Some proposals can be told to be moved into a category that basically says, don't ever submit this proposal again. Other proposals can be put into a class where they can be resubmitted, but then when they're resubmitted, that shows up. Reviewers know it's a resubmission. So you have to check the details of each agency, and sometimes even subparts of agency. NASA does not do that. We assume you're smart enough to take into account the comments of the previous panel, and we just go forward with it. Oh. So what does a review panel do? You know, prior to the panel meeting, each proposal was assigned anywhere from 2 to 4, usually 3 or 4, panel members to read it in detail. All the reviewers are knowledgeable about the broad area that the proposal is about, but they may not be the world experts on that particular sub-area. Independently then, each reviewer drafts a review and gives a grade before they come to the panel. Now, there may be other people who are doing the same thing but are not ever going to come to the panel. These are external reviewers, we call them, or mail-in or ad hoc. At the panel meeting, One of the reviewers is called the chief reviewer or the primary reviewer, and she then lays out the proposal's goal to the panel and leads the discussion. And as I said before, the discussion is anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes per proposal on average, and covers the waterfront of ideas and issues. The essence of the discussion is captured in the panel evaluation, which is written by the primary reviewer at the review panel and is agreed to by all the secondary reviewers, all the other people who read it, read the proposal, wrote reviews before they got to the panel, and then discussed it at the panel. And then that is what you receive. And that document is what you receive, and it's what I base selection recommendations on. So the usual actually what happens in a peer review panel is something like this. Where'd my thing go? I seem to have lost my little pointer. Oh, there it is. Okay, sorry. So, as I said before, the primary reviewer summarizes the proposal goals and provides her comments. Each of the secondary reviewers then provide their comments, and finally, the mail-in comments are read to everybody. Panel then discusses the proposal, and then one of two things can happen. One thing that panels do, and this is the dominant process, is they vote immediately for each of the three categories, for merit, relevance, and cost. Then the primary reviewer goes back to his or her hotel room that night and writes up a draft review form that has strengths, weaknesses under each of the categories and the scores. And then the panel as a whole reviews it the next day. An alternative to that is one in which they don't vote immediately. The primary reviewer drafts the panel summary, the panel reviews the draft and agrees, yeah, that's basically what we said, then they vote. Almost, I would say 90% or more of panels operate this first way. After all this happens, there's a final review process where the panel chair signs off on it, and then it comes to me. And I look at it, and the review, I read it, I edit it to make sure that it's clear, that it's not inflammatory, and that the words match the grade. And you'd be surprised how hard it is sometimes to achieve that kind of consistency. And then we rinse and repeat it for the other 142 proposals. So the three criteria NASA uses are, as I've said many times now, scientific and technical merit, programmatic relevance, and realism and reasonableness of cost. These are assessed independently of each other. So you can have a proposal that has a very high scientific and technical merit, but has very, very low programmatic relevance, and really shouldn't have been submitted to my program at NASA. Maybe it should have gone to Enriqueta Barrera's program over at NSF. Scientific and technical merit has a lot of subparts. The kinds of things panelists are encouraged to think about are the stated goals of the proposal compelling? How much will the proposed research actually advance the field towards those goals if it's successfully executed? Can the research be done to achieve the goals on the stated schedule? So is it 5 years of research crammed into 3, or 2 years of research expanded to 3? Does the proposal acknowledge potential pitfalls and propose alternatives? And does the team have the necessary expertise? And you could, in theory, see comments, both strengths and weaknesses, on all of these points. The second criterion is programmatic relevance, and it's judged against the text of the call for proposal. So it starts from assume everything worked as proposed, because the scientific and technical merit evaluation covers whether something can work. Relevance, we're going to say, assume it worked. Do we care? Does the proposal make an effective argument for its relevance to some area of, in my case, astrobiology research? The third criterion is realism and reasonableness of cost. And it's important to recognize right off the bat, this is not bang for buck. Reasonableness means that the resources requested, whatever they are, FTEs, meaning people time, travel money, supplies, beam time, sequencing, whatever, are those resources that are requested appropriate for the proposed research program? Are the amounts of resources realistic given the world out there? Realism means how much each resource costs, or the amount of each resource. For example, if you're asking to do 100 assays of a particular type on samples, it may be quite reasonable to need to do 100 assays in order to achieve the goals of the proposal. On the other hand, if you've budgeted 10 cents per assay and the going rate is $10, well, that's not realistic. Somebody's typing a question, so I will wait a second. Should you request funds for collaborators? Good question. The guidebook for proposers will tell you that there are two states of being. There's a co-investigator and there's a collaborator. Co-investigators provide a major intellectual input into the project, and they're funded. Collaborators are usually, by definition, not funded. So from your question, I think you're using collaborator not in the official way, but in the sort of more colloquial science way. And so, yeah, if the people you're working with, get away from that word, working with, are going to have a major contribution to what you're doing, and you need them to do it, you pay them. And so you usually include them in your budget. Okay? First. So relevance is a kind of complicated criterion for most reviewers. I believe the relevance criterion is about how well the proposal justifies its relevance to NASA and to my program. Some panelists take an independent view and believe that their job is to tell me, regardless of what the proposal says, why or how the proposal is relevant or not to my program. Some program officers prefer the second approach. I prefer the first approach. We're working on trying to figure out exactly what everybody wants to do. At the moment, I think we're leaning towards asking for both. The importance, though, of the relevance criterion varies from program to program. There are some programs that are binary. So for a Mars data analysis program, either you're analyzing data from a Mars mission or you're not. And if you're not, then you're not relevant to MDAS. Exobiology, the new Solar System Workings program, the new Emerging Worlds program, there can be degrees of relevance. And it may come down to how well you describe the relationship between the research you want to do, the specific objectives you're trying to meet, and the broader goals of the program. One thing I think I forgot to say about cost reasonableness is that we never ask our panelists to review the bottom line. And they're not supposed to tell us that a proposal costs too much. That's my job, basically. And like I said before, if you remember, if a meritorious proposal costs more than I can afford, I am not shy about picking up the phone and negotiating something with the principal investigator. And finally, I generally tend to tell my panels to avoid worrying about overhead rates, because most principal investigators have no control over the overhead rates that their institution makes them charge. And the only thing they can change their overhead rate is by changing institutions. And you wouldn't want a proposal review to say, gee, the major weakness, the overhead rate is too high, proposer should move. Stupid. So for each of these three criteria, I should go back for a second. Those are the three criteria NASA uses. NSF and NIH use different criteria. I'm not conversant with the current criteria for NIH. NSF has two criteria, scientific merit and broader impact. And there's a whole literature out there on what NSF considers a broader impact. So if you're applying to NSF, you really have to dig into stuff on their website about what is a broader impact, how they evaluate it, what do they want. NASA keeps score essentially by for each criterion defining strengths and weaknesses. And within them, a strength or a weakness could be considered major or minor. Now, there's no calculus here. It's not that, 3 minor strengths cancels a major weakness. It doesn't work that way. There is a balancing that does go on, though, between strengths and weaknesses, majors and minors. And that balancing is what determines the score you get. Excellent, very good, good, fair, poor. Essentially, a strength is something that really helps build confidence in the reviewers that the work will be completed as proposed successfully. A weakness is something that works the other way, that decreases confidence that the work will be successfully executed as. Majors and minors are basically about degree. Minor weaknesses are things that are correctable, easily fixed. Like, you're using this reagent, you should use that sometimes. Majors are major. They're big things that require some serious rethinking on the part of the proposer. One class of major weaknesses is called a fatal flaw, and no proposal with a fatal flaw can be selected. A fatal flaw basically means what it says, that you're violating a law of physics, or you're doing something that's already been shown to be impossible, or something like that. Here's a slightly silly example. So suppose I got a proposal to the exobiology program from something called Arkham Research Institute. And they claim that using multiple ancient hermetic sources, the proposals will demonstrate that the big 5 mass extinctions, so the mass extinctions of the history of the Earth, there were 5 of them that wiped out large chunks of life on Earth. The big 5 mass extinctions were caused by the attempts of the ancient ones to regain control of this plane of existence. They argue that understanding the cause of mass extinctions are relevant to understanding the probability of life elsewhere, and they actually go to some length to quote and analyze the call for proposal. They only ask for $150 in travel costs, even though in the proposal they say that their method of work will involve traveling to the 7 sacred libraries, which are hidden in various mountain ranges around the world, including the Transantarctic mountain range. And only 1/2 of a work year is proposed. What do people think about what would be the merit of this for the exobiology program? When people type something, remember it's excellent, very good, good, fair, poor. Excellent means no major weaknesses. Very good means that there are major weaknesses, but the strengths outbalance the weaknesses. Good means the strengths and weaknesses pretty much balance out, but there's no fatal flaw. Fair means that the weaknesses outweigh the strengths. And finally, poor means that there's a fatal flaw or multiple fatal flaws, or that there's so many weaknesses that the proposal really isn't functional. So what do people think? Type in I guess you can do a poll, but I'm not going to do it now. We got 2 votes for poor. Anybody else? Poor, 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 poor. Okay. What about relevance? Relevance, in my program, we graded on a 3-level scale. Very good, meaning it's a convincing argument was made. Good, meaning that a mostly convincing argument was made, but it could be better. And fair, meaning that no convincing argument was made, or the argument that was made wasn't very convincing. So how do people feel about the merit? I mean, the relevance. Let's see. Kevin said fair. Sonny Harmon said very good. Good for relevance or merit? Because relevance is either very good. Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. So you can see yourself now, based on the range we're seeing now of scores, that relevance is a little harder to get your hands around. Now, since you're supposed to assume for relevance that everything worked, that they were able to go to the 7 sacred libraries, they were able to get the sources, and they were able to investigate whether the big 5 math distinctions were caused by attempts of the ancient ones to gain control of this plane of existence. And it seems like they, I'm implying here that they did a decent job of justifying their relevance. This could be a good, or it could be even a very good. And then finally, how realistic and reasonable are the costs? Again, it's a 3-level scale. Very good, good, and fair. Yes, Sunny, fair is the worst you could rate it for cost reasonable. Realism. Okay, I think that's everybody. So you mostly graded a fair for budget, which is probably what it is. The reason this is a slightly silly example is I did once get a proposal in a different program that wanted to look at what are called linear crater chains. So you look on the moon, you see craters, and sometimes you see a chain of them 3 or 4 in a row. The proposal claimed that they would demonstrate that these chains of craters were caused by strafing runs from the war in heaven, as described in Milton. And this was when I was a young program officer, and I hadn't really started wrestling with what the relevance criteria meant. And to this panel's credit, I have to give them a lot of credit. They spent a good 20 minutes discussing the difference between merit and relevance. And they concluded that that proposal, while being hopelessly unmeritorious, was actually relevant to the program. If you could demonstrate that the source of linear crater chains on the moon was this war in heaven, we'd care. It would advance the goals of the program. So when you're thinking about this, remember, these are independent criteria. What do I do after the peer review wraps up, other than sleeping? So during a peer review, I make sure that all the reviews are fair and unbiased and that they're evaluated independently. I then try to integrate the findings from the panels with the programmatic and budgetary considerations that are swirling in my head. Some of that means programmatic balance, meaning that sometimes I will recommend for selection a proposal of lower quality, i.e. maybe a good or good, very good, over a proposal of higher quality, very good, say, if I have a bunch of things that are doing very related work to very good, but nothing doing work related to the good, very good area. That kind of sucks for people when they get a review back that says your proposal was very meritorious, but was not recommended for selection for programmatic reasons. But unfortunately, that is something I have to take into account. Exobiology is a very broad program. It covers a very wide area of sciences. And so sometimes I need to make these balances. I'm also going to look at budgets and time commitments and things like that. Finally, I will put all this together. I'll make a list of recommended selections. I'll give it to my selection official, and he will then decide yes or no, or ask me for more information. Why are you recommending this good proposal when this very good proposal isn't being recommended? So, any questions about that whole part of the process? I will be quiet for a minute. So a few last points then. The opportunities to fund your research are available. They're in roses. Find them, learn them, take ownership of them. By the time you're my age, and if you're still in the field, they will be yours. Always read the instructions. Follow them. Whether it's NSF, NIH, DOE, NASA, do that. That's important. NASA doesn't immediately throw out proposals that don't match our requirements. NSF, you cannot even submit a proposal that violates one of the formatting requirements or length restrictions. Remember that it's your job to make the proposal as easy as possible to understand for two audiences, the review panel and me. Think before you write. Have critiques done before you submit. Remember, peer review basically kind of if done right, levels the playing field. Panels should be told and are told at NASA to only consider what's in the proposal, which means that somebody who's been doing something for 20 years is at no particular advantage other than having 20 years of experience of writing proposals. You can use that to your advantage because sometimes when you've been doing this for 20 years, you get sloppy. Don't get sloppy. And finally, again, I will encourage you to start gaining experience now. Talk to your mentors. Find out about opportunities. No postdoctoral advisor, and probably not even a graduate student advisor, will say no when their student or postdoc comes to them and says, I want to get some money and I want to write a proposal. They shouldn't. It's part of your training. Now, the question that hasn't been asked, and I'll answer anyway, is about what if I'm a postdoc or grad student at an institution and I don't have what's called PI privileges? I'm not allowed to submit the proposal because individuals don't submit proposals. Institutions submit proposals. So NASA has I believe, unique position in a proposal where you can be listed as a co-investigator / science PI, which means that the ideas in the proposal are yours. That whoever's listed as a PI is listed for institutional purposes because they have the authority to ask their institution to submit the proposal, and you don't. But when we review it, and when we think about it, when I think about it, that proposal is not the PI's, it's co-investigator / science. And so that's a way for postdocs and grad students to actually be able to submit their own proposals as long as they get somebody senior who's tenure track or tenured to submit it for them. Now you got to trust that person that they're not going to take your idea and run with it. But it is an opportunity. So any more questions about grant writing? Hello? Anybody out there? Yeah, that's true. Is anybody out there is an astrobiology question? One of the big three, right? Yeah. So Longzhu has asked whether the panels know who submitted the proposal, and the answer is yes, they do. It is one-way blind, not two-way blind. Since I've had this conversation with a lot of people over the years, I don't know to what extent not allowing the panel to know who submitted the proposal would help anything. I literally don't know. So Brandy asked a good question. If you submit a proposal as a co-I/science PI, as a postdoc, can you take the grant with you when you get a faculty position? So that goes back to the business of, do you trust the institutional PI, the person whose name is at the top of the grant, or not? In theory, when you get a job somewhere with a grant where you're the co-I/science PI, the listed PI and his or her institution should give up the grant, and we can transfer it then to you at your new institution. And that's generally, in my experience, what I've seen happen. I personally have never seen a senior PI on a grant like that say, no, I'm going to do the work myself when they hire grad students. But it does kind of, depends on how much you trust that person. Like my first postdoctoral advisor, I would never have trusted to give me the grant. Have I ever had to cancel a grant? Well, so I guess the question is, what do you mean? I have had instances where principal investigators have passed away, and we've had to transfer the principal investigatorship to somebody else. I've had grants where the principal investigator wasn't getting along with the co-investigator, and the principal investigator fired the co-investigator. I've never had the case where I sent a grant out and the first year progress report came back and they said, well, we did nothing on this award this year, which would be grounds for canceling the grant, terminating the award. So I'm not 100% certain. So Jeff Osterhout has a question. This may be odd. How do I know when the proposal is well enough focused? A well enough focused proposal is something you really believe you can do in 3 years' time with yourself and maybe a grad student. That isn't very helpful, but that's what it means. You're not trying to do something that's going to take a decade. You're not trying to do something that will require, a staff of 10. I don't know what your field is, so I can't be more specific than that. You want the questions to be reasonable. And, that's where you get other people in your department or in your field to look at your grant and say, yeah, that's pretty well focused. Or now you're all over the map here. You've got, this thing here and that thing there and this thing over here. And it's going to take 5 years and 20 people and stuff like that. It's not there's no hard and fast rule. Hope it helps. So if there's no more questions about grants, the one thing I get asked a lot by early career people at meetings. Oh, Longzhu is typing. Sorry. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. One thing I get asked a lot when I meet early career people at meetings is, how do I get on a mission? Because NASA is fundamentally a mission agency. And I've got one slide that talks a little bit about it, but I don't really want to spend an hour on it. So there's kind of three ways to do it. The long road is to be part of a proposal team from the very, very beginning. Usually this means if you're an early career person that you are a grad student or a postdoc of somebody who's on the proposal team and they bring you along. It can also mean that you've got specific expertise either in a research topic or an instrument development or use that they need for the mission. Mission opportunities discovery, for example, comes around every 2 to 4 years. Your odds of getting funded the very first time are pretty low, and this is a very long road. It's not impossible, but it does take a lot of patience. A shorter road is to get added to a team after launch. How do you do this? Well, most missions, you remember the third slide, I talked about participating scientist programs and guest observer programs, guest investigators. These are calls for proposals to extend the science value of a mission by doing extra science essentially as part of the mission team. As I said, we just released one for the Dawn mission and Encounter at Ceres. It's coming out either Friday or tomorrow. And, you can propose that, and if it's evaluated by a review panel, the same as anything. The one difference is that we will go back to the mission and ask them two questions. First, is this research really distinct from anything that the mission is already being paid to do? And the second question is this proposed research making appropriate use of the instrument? Is it asking for something that the instrument can't provide? So it's not a bad way for early career people to get some mission experience. It's not the same hardware level experience that you get from actually starting at the beginning, but it gets you on the inside of a mission team. You get to see how operations are done, maybe how they're planned, and you get to be part of the science team. Basically, one way to prepare for the road trip is data analysis program, the DAPS. There you're working with spaceflight data. You're having to wrestle with issues of calibration. You're having to wrestle with pointing, jitter, all these kinds of things that you have to deal with when you're dealing with data taken from an instrument that's the size of a shoebox on a space probe that's moving at some ungodly speed past a very, very big planet. And that's one way you demonstrate to the community that you have the research expertise to be put on a team, either as a participating scientist, a guest investigator, or as an actual team member. The other key part is networking. Networking. Yeah, go to LPSC, go to the DPS meeting, see who's got posters talking about missions, talk to them, chat them up. It's the non-meritocratic side of the business. But that's kind of what you have to do so that when they are putting their mission proposal together and they realize they need somebody who's an expert in photogrammetry, they think of you as opposed to somebody else. We do have some career development programs that I've mentioned briefly. For grad students, there's the NASA Earth and Space Science Fellowships, which is basically will pay for 3 years of graduate school. There's the NASA Postdoctoral Program, which is for postdocs, and it usually supports postdocs at NASA centers, although for astrobiology, we've expanded it to include postdocs at astrobiology-funded investigators labs. The Early Career Fellowship I've talked about briefly. And finally, there is an organization called Women in Planetary Science that was formed by women scientists for women scientists. They have mentoring services, resource sharing. They host the Susan Niebuhr, I think it's a lunch at LPSC. They did a series called 51 Women looking at different women scientists and the decisions they've made and the paths they've taken. And so for female-identified early career planetary scientists, this is a good resource. And that is all I have to say. You apply for the Early Career Fellowship as a postdoc. You have to have gotten your PhD and be within, I think, 5 years of having received it to be eligible. You cannot have a tenure track equivalent position. My pleasure. So I know I covered a ton of material really quickly. I assume, Brandy, that I can send you these slides somehow.
Speaking on Brandy's behalf, yes, we would love it if you could send us those slides.
Okay. So I will send them to somebody as a PDF probably, okay?
That would be great. Thanks.
And as well, this is Mike. I'll be posting or sending the link to the recording of this session to you guys as well, and you can post that on AppGradCon's site.
Okay. So Kevin asked a question, can you apply for NESA for students in transition like MS applying to PhD? Yes. As far as I know, you just have to be in a graduate program. It's the NESF, the NESSF program is, the solicitation comes out in roses, so it's February-ish. Well, my pleasure, Brandy. My pleasure, everybody. Write proposals. Oh, Jeff has another question. Okay. So Jeff asked, I know you said grad students should start writing proposals early. Would you say that also submit often goes with that? Yeah, absolutely. Writing a proposal that doesn't get peer reviewed is kind of unsatisfying, and it's not going to help. You really need to see how people who don't know you, who aren't your buddies, respond to what you've written in order to learn how to write. There's no formula, I'm afraid.